Hi, my name is Brandon Shimoda. I'm here this morning reading for Brick. I'm going to read just the beginning of an essay I wrote about reading with my 3-year-old daughter. The essay is called Japanese American Incarceration for Children, and it's appearing in Brick 109, the summer 2022 edition. Special thanks to Allison Lasorda and Dion Brand. Japanese American Incarceration for Children. I discovered something about my daughter's relationship to books. If I cry the first time we read one together, it is likely she will not want to read it again. This has happened several times, most often with books written for children about Japanese American incarceration. My daughter is 3. She has seen me cry more times in the past year than I have seen my parents cry in 4 decades. When I cry, she is very comforting. She asks what is wrong or tries to be funny, but not when we are reading together. If I cry while reading a book with her, she becomes tense, sometimes scared, most often frustrated or annoyed. Then it feels like I have ruined the book and have taken from her the experience of developing, in her own way, a relationship with the story, which is in part an emotional relationship, therefore a relationship with her emotions. But sometimes my emotions take over, overwrite the story and my daughter's experience, and I cry. I cannot help it. The protagonists of children's books about Japanese American incarceration are, for the most part, children. A cat, a man who is lost, otherwise children. The subject is the children's experience, which, prior to an awareness of the conditions of their citizenship, is that of being bewildered, of bewilderment, which manifests as a sadness the children are unable to name. The reader, assuming they are an adult ushering a child through the story, understands or might understand, at least superficially, what the barbed wire and guard towers mean, which puts the children in the books in the position of having to catch up to the reader. The subject of children's books about Japanese American incarceration is children coming into an awareness of being enemies of their country and being forced into an antagonistic relationship with themselves. Sadness is one way of portraying it. The children, occasionally helped by family members and friends, most ridiculously by white friends and neighbors, but most often and most mournfully by themselves, discover and invent ways of transforming their sadness into a bittersweet understanding that life is much longer than any individual trauma, even as trauma is much longer than any individual life. I cried the first time I read Fish for Jimmy, written and illustrated by Katie Yamasaki. Jimmy, incarcerated in a dusty internment camp in a desolate land, loses his appetite. His mother and his brother Taro urge him to eat, but he refuses. He stops playing with other children, begins to lose his memory of life before camp. One night, Taro cuts a hole in the fence and runs to a mountain. A trickle of water led to a quiet pool where still black water reflected the night sky. He slips his hands into the water and pulls up 7 fish, bright orange and yellow, with Jimmy in miniature curled up asleep on each one. The next morning, Taro gives the fish to Jimmy, who eats them and immediately comes back to life. On the final page, Taro and his father, who has rejoined the family after being incarcerated in a Department of Justice prison, stare through the barbed wire fence at the reader. When I reached their faces in the final sentence, Taro showed Father how, each week, he would creep beyond the fence to the free air of the mountains to find fish for Jimmy. I gasped, then started crying. My daughter, silent throughout, looked at me with a grave expression, pushed the book closed with her hand, and said, "No." In A Place Where Sunflowers Grow, written by Amy Lee Tai and illustrated by Felicia Hoshino, Mari is walking with her father in Topaz. "Mama and I are worried about you," Mari's father says. "We know things are tough here, but you barely talk or laugh anymore." Mari does not say anything. They keep walking in silence, beneath watchtowers where military police pointed guns at anyone they feared might escape. How is Mari supposed to talk or laugh with guns pointed at her? The book is about art, its redeeming encouragement. Mari takes an art class. The fact that there were art classes should suggest how long incarceration lasted. Long enough for a civilization to rise from the dust and produce art education. Mari watches the other students fill their paper with colorful drawings, but her paper is blank. She is sorrowful, in a malaise. When her teacher encourages her to draw something from her life before camp, she draws her house and backyard in California, sunflowers touching the sky, and is proud, feels suddenly connected. The past achieves the horizon of the future. In Flowers from Mariko, written by Rick Noguchi and Deneen Jenks, and illustrated by Michelle Reiko Kumada, young readers are introduced to the trailer parks where families resettled after camp. Resettlement is embodied by a father's struggle to find work and his daughter's attempt to take hold of that struggle and lessen it. Mariko's father scavenges tools from dumpsters. He finds 2 packets of seeds and gives them to Mariko. She plants the seeds in the dirt outside their trailer. It takes time for them to bloom, but Mariko is committed, and the day they bloom, her father finds work. It is Mariko's commitment, fortitude, and belief that bring life to the bleakness. They celebrate. Mariko and her father dance. Mariko with a flower in her hair, her father with a flower tucked into his shirt. Everything was going to be fine, Mariko decided, because it was up to her to decide. Mariko, Mari, and Taro have all been drawn into the work of making things better. Their parents are not absent, but are not afforded the agency or the ability to bring their children's stories to a place where they might feel everything is going to be fine. Feeling fine is a decision reached by the children through the persistence of their efforts and the endurance against dementedness of their memories. The parents are guides, also part ghosts. Their struggles are only as explicit as the impact they have on their children.
Porous. I have an affinity for the liminal, for spaces between. On the verge of waking, for example, or falling asleep, when I find myself in a sort of hallowed fog, informed by dreams. An antenna state, where something unthought of could arrive. Between languages, according to Jacques Brault, we find l'espace de la créativité, space of sparking. When I translate, I travel the shadowy corridors between French and English, reaching into that lacuna before or behind language to plumb the depths. It feels as though there are secret trout swimming there, the glint and glimmer of gold scales. English uses the word conceived to describe the beginnings of a child, a word that, except in the instance of pregnancy, relates to ideas, to thought, to the mind, often to something too big to understand. I can't even conceive of that. Conception, beginnings, as something out of echoing blue depths, fathomless. 8 years before the twins were born, I was in a car crash in West Texas, alone but for the dog on the seat beside me. The long stretches of straight, flat highway under massive sky made me feel placeless, suspended. They could make a person careless. Somewhere past Valentine, as the dog's pink tongue hung loose from his mouth, I realized I was thirsty. I leaned down for the bottle of water on the passenger side floor, and when I looked back up, it was all wrong. I jerked the wheel to the left, and the ground began to peel out from under me, and then nothing was mine. Where did they come from, these small people who are mine to protect, mine to love. Certainly they came trailing something, maybe clouds of glory, maybe the dark and vivid unknown. In the life before, at the Center for Literary Translators in France, there was a man I called the Buddha of the residency. He was often on the balcony smoking rolled cigarettes. He liked to speak of his search for souveraineté, a concept from Georges Bataille. It might be too easy to translate this as sovereignty, although there is a kind of kingliness to it, and although this is the way the English versions present it. When he told me about it, between puffs of smoke, it felt to me like there was something more. With his eyes far off, he said he courts that state between sleeping and waking in his constant quest for souveraineté, as though it were something that would have to arrive in a slant way from the fog. I keep returning to the word porous. For me it is related to a space beyond the physical, which might be described with one of three not quite right words: dreamlike, otherworldly, magic. A space of spirit, another attempt at circumscribing the thing that is just out of reach. Porous is how I feel in the endless twilight of the first year of the twins' lives, and porous is how I try to be at times when I want to reach past this immediate plane into the something more I know is there. When a woman is pregnant, there is an exchange, a migration of cells between baby and mother. If, for example, the mother experiences an injury to her brain, cells from the baby will travel into the mother's bloodstream to arrive at the place where they're needed. There is both ultra-porousness and the necessity in certain areas of a hermetic seal. The two systems must have some separation from each other, or else neither would survive. At some point I learned to understand love as porousness. Now, only now, I am adding to that understanding. A line, a boundary is love too. I said I was alone on the desert highway. I was alone in the car, but I was following someone, the hermit cowboy, another man in search of his souveraineté. I was behind him, and then I was not. The car rolled over and over across the shoulder, the dividing strip, and the service road, and came to rest near the train tracks, upside down. The dog was found running east. There is a French expression I love for twilight, entre chien et loup, a time of day that wavers between domesticated and wild. Is day the tame one? Is night feral? From far off, in the bluish blur of that in-between time, who could distinguish whether the canine shape on the horizon is a dog or a wolf? I heard a voice and didn't know how to go towards it. Couldn't remember how to open my eyes, didn't recognize the voice or the question. I was hanging upside down. I can't get the seatbelt undone, I said. They strapped me to a stretcher and rushed me, facing backwards, to the tiny hospital in the tiny town 50 miles away, the cowboy hermit following me this time. 11 staples were placed along the gash in my head, and I was sent back out into the endless desert night. The twilight I keep feeling in the first year of motherhood, mauve and floating, is part of the new blurred order of things, sleep-deprived and winding through hallways, between two babies, entre deux, between two. There is no distinctness anymore to days and nights, only an endless alertness to their needs. My body and my mind are utterly absorbed, like a dog or a wolf, protecting. The twins are 2 years old when the pandemic forces us to attempt impermeability, covering our faces, keeping our distance, holding our breath when we pass someone on the street. We are told to stay inside our homes. We try to not be porous. In that first long lockdown winter, when the walls are pressing in, we pack the boys into the car and drive to the river. Unbuckled from their seats, they are like marbles shooting down a groove. Creatures set free. Seeds of burdock stick to our clothes as we make our way upstream. 3 older boys hold nets by the river's edge, their bikes lying in a heap on the bank, and my sons stop to watch them, faces very serious. One of the boys asks, would they want some rocks, and hands me two. Another boy spies a capitalist opportunity, asks if we want to buy a fish. These things change hands. Rocks, a dull golden coin, a bottle with silver ribbons of minnows. The boy's finger brushes mine. In the weeks after the crash, I turned to a passage from And Our Faces, My Heart, Brief as Photos by John Berger. I was in that state between waking and sleeping, it begins. From there you can wander towards either of the two. I was recovering in a house that was not mine, in a country that was not mine. Everything was white. Painkillers kept the world of real feeling at bay, and in that space, where there was nothing to hold, I clung to the sentences like they might save me. I had glimpsed another in-between. I had come back to the waking side. When I am pregnant, there comes a point when I have to prick my finger 3 times a day and drop beads of blood onto a small device. Then I know what things I can eat and how much. Sugars are measured to the milligram. The bodies of my babies, forming inside my body, permeable to each substance I allow into me, require a delicate balance. People believe for a few months, for a year, for 2, that it might be possible to hide from a virus, that there might be some way for whole populations to evade an invisible particle designed to circulate between us, made to move through our shared air and into the breathing passages of each creature on this living planet. My babies are born at 39 weeks through a knife opening, the position of their heads too hard, too tight inside the bowl of my pelvis to come any other way. My babies and I are permeable to each other, and then we are not. My body is inviolate, and then it is not. But even long after the seam on my belly has healed and closed and I can lie down in the bath again, even months, years after the knife, how is it that I feel this shiver deep in the pit of me every time one of my sons gets hurt?
The lemon tree drops its final fruit, a shriveled thing, fading to white. Some months ago, the tree burst through my living room floor on the 18th story. My turn to attend to the leaves. I did my best to care for the tree, but the roots were burrowed 200 feet below me, so I could only spray the leaves with water and hope. My hope proved ineffective. The leaves withered on my watch. I hold the last dead lemon in my hands. Likely, I too will die soon. Nonsense, says the voice of my mother. What will become of the lemon tree? I have on my dining table a bowl filled with plastic lemons. I tape a few to a branch, which wobbles under the weight of my false fruits. As I watch, it rights itself to accept my offering, that bright yellow, that graying bark. I dig out a tube of cadmium yellow paint the old woman left behind when she died here. The paint is mostly squeezed out, crusted at the rim, but I manage to extract some usable substance. I smear it onto the wall, craft some vague mimicry of a sun for the tree to observe. As I finger paint my wall, I hear a melody. A violin? I hold my left hand to the wall, and a single note, sustained, hums back at me. As I sweep my finger upward, the pitch follows. My right hand to the wall builds a chord. All my knives have long since dulled, but the bread knife can scrape at some drywall well enough. Below my makeshift sun, I scrape and I scrape. Piles of drywall dust accumulate on the floor and over my feet. I scrape until I can poke my head and shoulders through the wall, until I can observe that vast darkness between the drywall and the brick that keeps the outside out. That dark expanse through which the metal strings are strung. Each string looks as thick as a finger, spreads down as far as I can see, and upward into forever. They vibrate just inside the last layer of wall. I'm sure I will die soon. I know, says the voice of my mother. However, as we discussed, I leave the hole in the wall, return to the tree in the center of the room. One of the lemons has sprouted spindles, resembling a dozen tentacles through its rind, resembling, almost, the sun. Lopsided, a little ugly, but charming all the same. I touch the lemon with the tip of my ring finger, and it startles, pulls back into itself. I say sorry and withdraw. As I watch, the lemon extends a spindle along the length of the branch and curls its grip around the trunk. I don't dare move. A tiny leaf at one of the spindle's ends turns to face the sun, the strings. Slowly, so as not to cause alarm, I retreat to the hole in the wall and try to pluck a string, but they're beyond my reach. Instead, I again put my hand to the drywall, still intact. Silence. Then I recall the paint, the way it behaved, music's conductor. The old woman who died here had a lover once. When she asked him to leave, the windows cracked and the door hinges fell. The clean outside air wafted in, and she could breathe for the first time in 30 years. So the story goes. I have noticed no cracks in the sealed and blackened windows, and the door hinges remain ever in their stubborn place. It is possible someone fixed what was broken, but I found the old woman's body when I moved in, stuffed in the linen closet beneath the shelf of paints. I pay no mind to the careful in the voice of my mother. Then I pay no mind to the skeleton on the closet's floor. I am practiced at ignoring the skeleton on the floor. Paradise Green sits hidden behind a collection of ugly green paint tubes. How the old woman had so many atrocious greens, I do not understand. Paradise Green has hardly been touched. I splash the runny substance below my sun. A few drops drip into the hole, and what is lost is lost. I paint a facsimile of a meadow between the hole and the sun. There goes the wall, humming in its violin voice, amplified this time, lacking a drywall barrier between the strings and me. As I paint, as the wall sings, that strange and sprouting lemon leans in to hear the music. My mother played the violin when she was young, before the smoke overtook the skies. In those days, as the story goes, the smoke came only once a year, during August's annual catastrophe of fires, then flitted away with autumn's descent. In those days, my mother played Slavonic Fantasy in B minor, songs my mother taught me by Antonin Dvorak, every morning with her mother at the piano. My grandmother played the piano as a woman should, beautifully, skillfully, and without ambition. These two women could never speak to each other as they aged, as they collected between them too many decades-old qualms. But they always shared songs my mother taught me. I have forgotten most of the songs my mother taught me. Go back to Dvorak, says the voice of my mother. My grandmother died on the day of my birth. When the lemon tree first rose into my home, I was closer to death than I am now. The tree was farther. Exactly when we traded places, I do not remember. Only the old woman, consistent in her decomposition, could accurately mark the time, if I could read the erosion on her bones. Her sole identifiable marking is a blade-thin, 2-inch long hole in a straight line across the top of her skull. But I try not to wonder what killed her. It could not benefit me to speculate how a woman dies alone in her apartment and remains unfound. I try not to imagine her life, but I do believe she was beautiful. Her skeleton seems it. I add a drop of paradise green to the spray bottle on the windowsill and spray the tree's leaves. I take a moment to stop myself from wondering if there's anybody watering the roots. There must be, or the tree could not have grown to this height. There must be someone down there, tending to the roots, with her mother's voice in her ear. Oh, but I intended not to wonder. The leaves seem to enjoy the taste of the spray. A wilted leaf rises. A lemon even stretches out to catch a drop. The branch that mothers my fake lemons has strengthened, and the bark holds a whisper of its rightful color. I spray every rotting leaf on every rotting branch. The stomata drink the green, and I imagine the tree must feel a gratitude. I would. I store the bottle in my pocket and refocus my attention on the wall, the violin strings. It seems harmless enough, this knowledge. Nice even, if niceness were some possible thing. But to play the strings, I will need a bow. I approach again the tree. I reach a finger to the branch without leaves. The tree keeps still. Every minute, more sprouts shoot out from the lemons to flow and twine around the trunk. I wrap my hand around the bare branch, and again the tree is not disturbed. Can I take this? I ask, and with its stillness, I imagine the tree ascends. So I break off the branch. The tree retreats into itself with an improbable and sudden crack, the loudest sound I have heard since I made this apartment mine. I had all but forgotten the existence of such noise. I'm interested more than startled, though of course I am remorseful, having caused pain to the tree, of course. Since I've already mangled the tree, my project can cause no further harm, so I continue to craft my bow. I pay no mind to the huddled tree as it tries to pull comfort into itself. It's shivering so slight, I could pretend the wind is its cause. That is, if I gave any attention to the shivering, which I do not. I leave the tree to its disrepair. To string the bow, I must first locate some thread. I must take down the curtains. I closed the curtains the day I moved in. With blackout fabric, I could imagine anything I wanted outside. A snowstorm, even rainfall. Now, before I take the curtains down, I try to imagine a sky in blue. It was a marvel, says the voice of my mother upon my attempt. I've forgotten the exact shade, but oh, it was wondrous. Can you guide me to the shade? I ask of my mother. I can try. In the closet, I hover my hand over each tube of paint, waiting for her confirmation. Not even this one? I've never seen a sky blue that was sky blue. I remember that much. I touch my finger to Bluebell. That's the one. When I take down the curtains, I keep my eyes closed and slather Bluebell across the glass. The blue offers the room what I can only assume is called daylight. If daylight means the square patch that brightens the floor, the brightness that hurts the naked eye but draws me out of myself all the same, fills me somehow with a sensation in my lungs that startlingly resembles reprieve. As the story goes, my grandmother was buried in a blue casket. No, it was a turquoise casket. Turquoise is a shade of blue, according to the denotation on the paints. The paints do not know more than me. The person who made the paints knows more about color than any of us. Did I raise my daughter to trust a stranger? As the story goes, my grandmother was buried in a turquoise casket. My mother played Dvorak at the funeral. It was a sunny day. I hated that sun, which echoed the cheer I was so dutifully suppressing. But I played Dvorak for her. It was the only thing we shared, that music. She wasn't an easy woman to know. She was harsh, downright cruel more often than not. Certain she knew everything about everything. When I challenged her, she berated me until my tears flooded her living room. When I tried to go my own way, all she did was tighten her grip. It took my getting pregnant for her to leave me alone. I was 17 when I had you. She was so bent out of shape that she ended up dead. But of course, I mourn her. She was my mother. I understand her so much better now. Against my will, I wander after the old woman. She must not have left a daughter behind to play violin for her and say mean things about her and understand her. Otherwise, that daughter's daughter would be here instead of me. With the awkward tip of my makeshift bow, at least 6 feet long to the best of my estimation, I can poke at one of the strings. I cannot reach far enough to make any music of substance. I hang my failure of a bow on a tree branch and pretend I did not uselessly wound the tree. Now I was standing next to the tree, and the wall is covered in my crude paintings, and there's the hole in my wall, and there's a dead old woman in my closet. I don't want to think about it all at once. I'll show you what I see, says a voice that is not my mother. I glance at the closet. Come and sit with me. Who killed you? The same man who will kill you.
Good afternoon. My name is Sina Queyras, and I'm reading Joan, if you can. It is an essay in, I believe, 10 movements. 1. When asked in her 1978 Paris Review interview whether there were any women who had particularly influenced her writing, Joan Didion replied that George Eliot had attracted her and the Brontes encouraged her delusions, but she was not temperamentally attuned to Virginia Woolf. For a long time, I thought I was not temperamentally attuned to Joan Didion. 2. Good writing is alive. It's solid, but also mercurial. It changes from one read to the next. One believed one knows a text, a voice, is comfortable in it, and then suddenly new meaning is revealed. I thought I knew Joan Didion's essay on keeping a notebook, for example, having read it many times over the years and having assigned it repeatedly to students. Now I look at the essay and the following sentence stops me. We are brought up in the ethic that others, any others, all others, are by definition more interesting than ourselves, taught to be diffident, just this side of self-effacing. This is a way of being that is familiar to me, but it's not one that I associate with Joan Didion. More importantly, who is included in this others? Didion goes on to reveal that only recently, when this essay was published in 1968, was she able to walk into a room without hearing some version of the line, "You are the least important person in the room and don't forget it." Of all the writers of Didion's generation that I love, Didion is the one I would least expect to read this from. She's the one whose self-confidence appears the most seamless, the most uncomplicated. So what is this sentence doing here? Sorry, what is this sentence about self-effacing doing here? 3. Realism, I learned from Joan Didion, is a matter of style. Style, I learned from Virginia Woolf, is a matter of rhythm, but according to Didion, style is actually a character. I've long pondered this idea. What if my writing, for example, does not reflect the character I perceive myself to be? Or does style naturally evolve? Where or how do we discover a rhythm of our own? And how do we recognize it, this style that we will ultimately inhabit? I'm not the least an intellectual, she writes, which is not to say that when I hear the word intellectual, I reach for my gun, but only to say that I do not think in abstracts. Eyes on the periphery, she says, as if she needs to distract herself to hear herself think. You have to be still. Images first, then rhythm. Images pulse. Look hard enough and you can't miss the shimmer. The shimmer is literally happening. 4. Didion embodied style. Like Sylvia Plath, born just 2 years before her, Didion went to New York. Only rather than get an internship at Mademoiselle, as Plath did, Didion worked at Vogue. Going to work for Vogue was, in the late 50s, not unlike training with the Rockettes, she observes, confirming the sense of performance of the inescapable display of gender a young woman of that, or really any era, has to work hard to escape. Up for apprenticeship, Didion says, we were connoisseurs of synonyms, collectors of verbs. She learned to write and rewrite, write and rewrite again, and so how to compress language, animate and reanimate, make it fit or sprawl, and of course, do it all with style. On the other hand, as she famously notes, grammar was an instrument that she played by ear. We were never important to ourselves. As a young writer, I was subject to a constant effort to beat this interest in self-narrative out of me. In life and in university workshops, we were told again and again that we were not interesting. Our lives, even Toni Morrison recounts saying this to her students, were not interesting. If we were interested in ourselves, we were to lay that self over a larger, more important, and generally male figure or narrative. We were also encouraged to marry well. Unlike Plath, Didion made an exceptional choice in marriage. Like Virginia Woolf, she created a literary partnership. 5. I've been a writer my entire life. This statement, Didion follows with the observation, as a writer, even as a child, long before what I wrote began to be published, I developed a sense that meaning itself was resident in the rhythms of words and sentences and paragraphs, a technique for withholding whatever it was I thought or believed behind an increasingly impenetrable polish. This sentence sums up my relationship to Joan Didion. I relate intensely to the first half, then the middle teases me into thinking I'm going to learn something about the state of being. But then when we get to the word technique, the sentence itself seems to upbraid me. The way this sentence animates is pure Didion, and in a way I can't really put my finger on. It's just a physical turn, almost like a slap. How did we get from joy of meaning and rhythm to withholding? I've always been interested in how writing happens, as interested in how writing happens as I am in reading or writing. How does she do it? One question. Where does she put herself? Where is she? Grammar rules we can manage, but where do we put our bodies? How does one survive in relation to the patriarchy? That's a whole other style. Didion's style, Zadie Smith notes, was confidence. I was never sure I could be present in my own text to the degree to which Didion seems able to be present in hers. Self-confidence is not something I've always been comfortable with. I perceived it to be a mark of entitlement, and as such, I approached it as a kind of hostility. 6. Still, nothing prepared me for the Didion we encounter in the year of magical thinking. Time seems to have slowed. Time seems to have caught up with the author here. Everything slows. Each gesture seems to have the clarity of a reel of film, a life flattened, pliable, slowly turning and winding around one's hand, which is to say, startling, fragmentary, shimmering, and yet uncannily banal. Here, I could identify with Didion's desire to understand and accept not only what had happened to her husband, but what was happening to her. This is the kind of realism I'm after. Apostrophyless, unrelenting. Death wakes us to our lives, to the shimmer of our style. Our minds grope in the dark soup, punctuated by sensations we respond to and attempt to make meaning from. Here's where Woolf and Didion meet, the attempt to align the inside and the outside. I could see that Didion had been doing this all along, trying to understand her place in family, national, and political narratives. Could see how she had doggedly pursued herself from the early essays. My good girl, where am I from? What has my ancestry given me? The ground under my feet? Right up to The Year of Magical Thinking, a book I have read countless times since its publication in 2005, and which spurred me to reread and reassess everything, right from the beginning. What a mind, working every second to document against the abyss. 7. If I call up the image of a confident writer, Didion is right at the top, along with a bevy of women born in the early 1930s. She's a contemporary of Plath, as I have said, but also a contemporary of Susan Sontag, Janet Malcolm, Toni Morrison, Audre Lorde, Gloria Steinem, Edna O'Brien, Yoko Ono, Carol Churchill, Monique Wittig, June Jordan, and Alice Munro. Each a strong, seemingly confident woman with a relationship to power and patriarchy on an upriver journey to a self and style of her own. I miss this generation of women, which is likely why I soaked up Didion's essays in the recently published Let Me Tell You What I Mean, especially the glimpses of a young Didion coming to writing. 3 eyes slash vertically, not horizontally, across the opening page of Why I Write. A title Didion tells us she stole from George Orwell. That I really amplifies the insistence on the expansiveness of the project of self-creation. But as Hilton Els notes, creation by self-discipline, not self-repression. She was a Republican in the manner of the self-made men of the West. I sense her eyeing me now suspiciously, always a feature of my experience reading her, facing off at sundown, a slender John Wayne in a linen dress. I sense she would not be amused by my observations. Hers is the dream of unbiased criticism, the dream of neutrality and bootstrap. She has the nose and the rigor of a newsman, the instincts and flair of an entertainer. She's a beloved hip aunt and a Mailer-esque daddy, exhaling a vision and holding it aloft like a billboard hovering over a 12-lane freeway, blinking from a time that appeared to be less dire, if not any less complicated. 8. I had and have no talent for it, no feel for the rhythms of the short story, Didion writes, in telling stories. Equating here the form of short fiction writing with the quaint and the claustrophobic kind of writing that offers only a window on the world, unlike the novel, which is actually the world. On the other hand, she suggests that short story writers might better know their own minds. An important distinction is being made, seems to do with genre, but it's more about style, which appears to be the quality or character of thought. What is on the mind rather than what is in. Here again comes the stillness, room for images to accumulate around her, ideas to take root. 9. I don't read enough about how young women come to writing, how we offer ourselves up to workshops, universities, and masterclasses to try to glean some way of being okay with ourselves, both inside, mental preparedness and craft, but also out, financially, socially. We come, it seems to me, not necessarily to acquire skills, but to hone those we have and to find our kin. We are rarely welcomed. Maybe we shouldn't be, is a thought that comes to me when reading Didion. It's a thought that smacks of another era, the sense of wonder and alienation from the powerful female figures I grew up with, my mother was also born in the early 1930s, who often seemed to hold young women at such a distance, as if expecting us to succumb. Looking at Didion's young self, we see the lonely origins of the female writer, of her experiences at a junior, of her experience as a junior at Berkeley, taking Mark Shorer's prose workshop. She observes, "It seemed increasingly clear to me that I had no future." She spends hours searching for what she might wear to the prose workshop and ends up selecting a dirty raincoat, hoping she might appear invisible in it. She sits, a silent figure in the room. 10. Joan, if you can, which is to claim intimacy. I was never temperamentally attuned to the young Didion. I always felt in her presence like a bit of a clown with my heart in my mouth. Earnestness is the enemy of style. Still, I could never look away. And I think if I encountered Didion at any point in her life, sitting at a table next to me in a restaurant, for example, or across the aisle on a plane, I would have recognized her immediately, even if she didn't look up, never made eye contact, never so much as blinked. This withholding, it turns out, is what interests me. Her awareness of writing as she's writing. Poise, self-possession. A sense, how to say this artfully, that she is not here to play, but also that she has not come with answers. In fact, I think I saw her once, sat next to her in a workshop. She was young, ambitious, in her raincoat, patient beyond expectation, and then suddenly exasperated at all the flailing. She took a penknife out of her pocket and stabbed the air, and just like that, the room emptied of all the clutter. I hadn't even known it was there. I hadn't seen a window. I hadn't even thought of a view.